Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you to our third annual, I believe it is, CSG eCademy webinar on the states to watch on transportation funding. My name is Sean Sloan. I'm the Program Manager for Transportation Policy at the Council of State Governments in Lexington, Kentucky. We've got a lot to get to over the course of the next hour, so we're going to go ahead and dive right in. Here's our agenda. Next slide. We're going to hear first from our friend James Corless from Transportation for America to get some national context on what's going on around the country with states addressing their transportation funding needs. We'll get hopefully an insider's perspective on what's happening in Iowa from our old friend Senator Todd Bowman, who chairs the Senate Transportation Committee there. He is actually on the floor of the Iowa Senate as we speak, so we may have to wait a little bit for him, but hopefully he will be able to join us. We'll stay in the Midwest and talk with David Montgomery from the St. Paul Pioneer Press about what's happening in Minnesota this year. I'll have some notes on some other Midwestern states to watch. Then we'll go south and hear from Bruce Seisloff with the News and Observer in Raleigh about recent developments in North Carolina. Walter Jones from the Morris News Service will join us to talk Georgia transportation and politics. And then for a little bit different perspective, we're going to talk with Keith Goebel, who is the state legislative editor for Landline Magazine, the official publication of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. He's going to talk about what's going on in Texas this year. Again, I'll have a few notes on other southern states to watch. Then we will go out west and talk with Michael Lindblom of the Seattle Times about Washington State and look briefly at some other western states. Michael Catalini from the Associated Press will join us to talk about what may happen in New Jersey this year. Chris Keating from the Hartford Courant will do the same with regards to Connecticut. A note or two on some other eastern states, and then we will all attempt to respond to your questions. If you have a question for any of our guests, you may type it into the GoToWebinar interface on your screen at any time. We will collate those here in Lexington and ask as many as time allows. So I want to begin by welcoming in James Corless. He is the director of the Washington, D.C.-based organization Transportation for America, an alliance of elected business and civic leaders from communities across the country that advocates for investment in, as their website says, smart, homegrown, locally driven transportation solutions. James, what can we say generally about what we're seeing in states around the country this year with regards to transportation funding, and what are the factors behind that level of activity?
Sure. Well, thanks, Sean, and thanks so much for having me and Transportation for America on this call. It's certainly a distinguished panel. I think we can say for the next year or two that we're going to see as much, if not more, activity than we saw the last 2 years in legislatures, and frankly, that's pretty historic. Maybe I'll just back up a second and give a little bit of our perspective on what we think has been going on, and of course, would love to get other panelists weighing in on this. I'm sure we will. Congress passed a federal transportation bill in 2012 called MAP 21, and our organization worked very hard on that bill. For lots of very unusual things about that bill, it wasn't funded entirely with user fees, lots of creative sort of ways to add on to what has really been a declining revenue from the federal gas tax that hasn't been raised since 1993. It was only 2 years in length. In fact, it took 3 years to debate a 2-year bill, and for the first time in memory, we didn't have a federal transportation authorization bill that actually grew significantly in size from the previous one. The trend line had been going up for a very long time, for decades, and this bill it struggled to get to basically stable, flat funding, and only then for 2 years. With that kind of precarious nature at the federal level, I think what we saw beginning in 2013, the year after that bill was passed, was states I think really begin to take notice, to really begin to internalize, understand Uncle Sam's not going to come to the rescue for us in terms of infrastructure funding, so we got to take this on ourselves. And we saw a historic number of states the last 2 years take on and pass and adopt nearly a dozen states transportation revenue packages. And I think, again, this year, as I said, out of the gates, pretty strong and pretty early, some on this webinar today, many others who were looking at doing something similar with revenue. I just want to highlight a few among others, and even some on this call. Certainly Minnesota, representation on this call, but couple of years, a couple of efforts have been tried, obviously, in that legislature for transportation, a major transportation funding package had not succeeded under a Democratic governor and Democratic control of the legislature. This year, now that control is split. We'll see what happens again with Governor Dayton introducing a proposal up there. We've got Idaho and Utah, among others, that are actually looking for and seeking to get some authorization for not just actually increases in the gasoline tax, but more local option revenues for cities and counties and regions being able to go to the ballot. Interestingly, for those states where ballot measures and taxes going to the voters are a sort of a pretty regular occurrence, we've got dozens of states where that's not even possible or legal. So many states looking at actually enabling that, giving more authority to local governments. We've got a pretty big measure down in Georgia, where after years of not really taking up transportation, the legislature, and even in the last couple of days, has been revisiting an initial plan to significantly increase transportation funding down there. We've got Iowa, Illinois, that are also looking at pretty major packages. We've got Michigan that had a lame duck deal in December and is now going to go to the ballot, go to the voters for a 1% increase in their statewide sales tax, a somewhat complicated proposal, but basically is going to be talked about in terms of both education and roads. If they get the 1% increase, they do some policy mechanisms and some legislation kicks in that then will actually pretty significantly increase transportation funding. And finally, I'm not going to hit all these states, Oregon, Louisiana, Mississippi, all looking for, as well, some pretty, maybe perhaps straight up traditional revenue increases. I want to also just highlight a couple of themes. In fact, Transportation for America being a nationwide nonprofit, as you've described us, dedicated to really kind of innovative ways of both finding more funding for transportation and spending it smarter on sort of locally innovative projects. A couple of themes that emerged from a report that we actually just released last week up on our website, tforamerica.org. And I'm happy to get into these further in some Q&A or if any has questions. But a couple of themes we've seen emerge. Accountability and transparency. It clearly, I think this is perhaps obvious to many of us, but to go to the voters or even to go to the legislature and ask for a revenue increase, the voters are going to want to know, what am I buying for my money? Why a tax increase? And so different kinds of approaches have been tried through things called performance measures, project selection criteria, but I think really understanding, letting the public understand what they're buying for their money is really important. Getting local officials really engaged, getting them excited in this process and legislature is really important. We saw Pennsylvania in 2013 have a pretty significant package and a competitive grant program that went specifically to local governments and local entities. And we're seeing more of that too. In part, those local option taxes are designed to do that. We're interestingly seeing not so much of a partisan divide in legislatures, but in our minds and in our analysis, really more of an urban-rural divide. And I do think that's something that I'd even love to hear other presenters comment on. It's some of the bigger cities and the bigger metropolitan regions, the state capital perhaps, versus other parts of the state, in as much as designing a package that can really lift all boats and do things equally and as well for rural areas as they can for urban, suburban, and metropolitan areas. That divide seems to be a bit more stark and honestly a bit more difficult and challenging to bridge, though it's possible, and states have done that. Strong leadership from the governors, typically whether it's the budget, the governor's budget, whether it's the State of the State address, which many governors have used this past January to talk about transportation. And again, this varies. It's not a sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of recipe for these state packages, but certainly we've seen lots of gubernatorial involvement, advocacy, support, not always, but often. The advocacy from a broad coalition, so interesting people getting together, perhaps unusual partners and bedfellows pulling together, whether it's environmental groups and road builders, but everybody from AARP. I think these days, again, with transportation being a bit of a bigger lift, you've got to build an even bigger coalition. And then I think finally really trying to characterize and explain to legislators and voters why we need to do something now at a state level. And interestingly, we've been watching sort of the messaging, the communications around the urgency to act, if you will. And a lot of it, as you might imagine, and perhaps is no surprise, is around economics. In Pennsylvania, they made a lot out of construction companies either leaving or potentially leaving the state of Pennsylvania to go south to states that had done more on infrastructure because the jobs were no longer there in Pennsylvania. In Minnesota, we're seeing a lot of messaging and sort of positioning this as not just, of course, important fixing roads and bridges and safety, but also about making the state and the state's economic engines competitive. How do we attract talent? How do we attract young people and keep young people in our state? We saw this in Indiana last year with getting a local option tax for Indianapolis. So those are some of the broad themes. I mean, as a transportation person and organization, we're really excited to see all this movement in the states. And I think it really is, as the sort of the adage goes, the laboratory of democracy. I think people are inventing this stuff as we go. Got a lot more to say and offer in terms of some of the revenue mechanisms and some of the other ingredients and lessons learned. But I guess I'll probably close there. And hopefully that has provided a bit of an umbrella, an opening, if you will, for others to add on to.
Great. Thank you so much, James. And please do stay with us. I'm sure folks may have questions for you at the conclusion of today's webinar. And folks, remember, if you do have questions for any of our guests, you may type it into the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Also, if anyone would like some additional information about the overall level of activity among the states this year, a couple things that I've found recently. There was an article last Friday in the Asheville Journal that has a good list of states that may consider fuel tax increases this year. There's an article today on governing.com by Dan Bach in which I'm quoted, and it has the headline, Raising Gas Taxes Gets Bipartisan Boost from Governors. And as always, you can check out my blog posts from the past few weeks on the CSG Knowledge Center. Well, we were going to, at this time, talk with our friend Senator Todd Bowman, who chairs the Senate Transportation Committee in Iowa. And it looks like he has not joined us, and it looks like he is actually still on the floor. I've got my iPad set up with video from the live video from the Iowa Senate, and so I'm able to keep track of what's going on there. But it looks like he's not going to be able to join us at this time. But I spoke with Senator Bowman earlier, and he told me that there are 6 bills on the Senate floor this afternoon, and he had to present every single one of them. So he may or may not be able to join us later. So we will come back to him if we can later on. I will just say this about Iowa at this stage. Lawmakers in both parties are optimistic that a 10-cent gas tax increase will have a strong chance of passage this session to help the state plug a $215 million funding gap. The state last raised its gas tax in 1989. It looks like conservative anti-tax groups are mobilizing against an increase, and some lawmakers who don't like the idea are suggesting other ideas like legalizing marijuana and fireworks to help close the gap. Senator Bowman told me the gas tax increase legislation is actually being introduced this week, so hopefully we will be able to talk with him a bit later on in the program and get some further behind-the-scenes details from him. But right now we are going to go a little further north and bring in David Montgomery. He is a political reporter for the Pioneer Press in St. Paul. And David, Governor Mark Dayton recently announced a plan to invest in fixing the state's roads and bridges and improving transit. What can you tell us about that and the prospects for it or any other initiatives this session?
Governor Mark Dayton here, who's a Democrat, along with a Democratic majority in the Senate and a coalition of interest groups called MoveMN, have all proposed pretty similar transportation funding plans that would raise $6 to $11 billion over the next decade through a combination of raising fees and taxes for both roads, bridges, and mass transit. They say that that's what's needed to both repair roads and meet the long-term needs of the state. As was mentioned earlier, Minnesota has divided government this year. The Republicans control the House, and Democrats control the Senate and the governor's office. So that throws a potential obstacle into things. The Republicans have outlined a short-term plan to provide some extra money from the general fund for immediate road needs, but they haven't unveiled any sort of long-term proposal. In fact, they've said that they're in no particular rush to offer one. They say one is needed, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen this year. Minnesota operates on a biennial budget. It's possible that things would come back next year and pass a plan then. Some of the things that are going on, it was mentioned that an urban-rural divide is big in a lot of states. That's certainly true in Minnesota. The Republican strength is in the outstate region. They just took over the House of Representatives through a campaign that focused in part on a backlash against the perceived dominance of the Twin Cities area in the previous legislature. And Republicans are very loudly saying that they want to focus on roads and bridges and not, sometimes explicitly stated, sometimes implied, mass transit in the urban area. Another factor behind Republican reluctance here, as well as reluctance from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce to back this plan, is that in 2008, while a lot of states haven't raised their gas taxes in years or decades, in Minnesota, the gas tax was raised in 2008. It's phased in over several years, overriding the governor's veto at the time. And then in 2013, the Democrat-controlled legislature and Governor Dayton passed a significant income tax increase, as well as increases in alcohol and cigarette taxes. So Republicans are saying that more revenue may be needed, but it's just too soon for more tax increases, and they're content to wait longer before passing things. There's also some dispute about the size of the need. Interest groups are saying that you need at least $6 billion over the next decade in order to both maintain the system and expand it to account for projected future growth. Republicans have said that maybe just a wish list from highway contractors, and want to take a closer look and see what's truly needed. And finally, there's an interesting component. The governor and Democrats here are proposing to raise money from the gas tax, but they don't want to hike the existing cent per gallon gas tax. They're proposing applying the state's sales tax rate to the wholesale price of gasoline, with the idea that if gas prices go back up to $4 a gallon or higher, the state would get more money that way. And it's sort of a complicated mechanism that, in part because they're also proposing including a price floor on it, so that even if gas prices were to stay where they are now or fall even further, the tax revenue wouldn't fall any further. It also would be calculated once per year. It's a fairly complex system, and there's a lot of the backlash, I think, is sort of focusing on that. We'll see if that survives. Also included in the system is a sales tax increase in the Twin Cities metro area, which would fund mass transit projects. So all this is plans have been put on the board. It's too early to say what's going to happen. The big question is whether Republicans will find a plan that they can support, or whether they'll just simply hold the line, and we'll have to wait another year for anything comprehensive in Minnesota.
Yeah. Well, thanks, David. And I know that you have actually spent some time in the next state that I'm going to be talking about, so just stay with us for a minute, and maybe I'll get a comment or two from you on this. But I want to mention a few other Midwestern states to watch this year. South Dakota, which is home to the co-chair of our CSG Transportation Public Policy Committee, Senator Mike Valley. In that state, Senator Dennis Dugard has a plan to raise $41 million in state revenue through fuel tax increases and a motor vehicle excise tax hike, and another $10 million for local projects through vehicle registration fee increases. And that proposal is roughly half of what the legislative panel chaired by Senator Valley proposed. But it looked like, at least as of last week, that the governor's proposal was gaining ground with legislators and would actually be the starting point as deliberations begin. I just received an email from Senator Valley, though, with an update, and he says that he's sorry that he's so busy and isn't able to join us this afternoon, but he says that Right now, the plan has come down to 2 cents a year, a gas tax increase, presumably, for 8 years, with a 10% increase in license plate fees, 4 to 12 wheels available for the county wheel tax, $1 increase on license plates a year for 8 years, a local option of $1.20 per $1,000 real estate tax for counties, local option of 50 cents per $1,000 for townships. Both these two local options are deferrable to a local vote. So that's the latest news from Senator Valley there. And David, bring you back in just for a moment. Is there anything you can add to what your experience in South Dakota tells you?
In South Dakota, the state roads are actually in pretty good shape. The Republican-dominated state there will credit the stimulus money they received, so that really helped them shore up the state's roads. But local roads are really hurting, especially in the northeastern part of the state where there's been a lot of flooding. A couple years ago, lawmakers from both parties overrode Governor Dugard's veto of an increase in vehicle registration fees to help local governments pay for road needs, but even that wasn't seen as enough. And when Governor Dugard ran for re-election this past year, he had run in 2010 and made a no new taxes pledge, and when he ran for re-election, he explicitly said that he wasn't making that pledge again, implying that transportation was something that would need extra revenue in order to fix, and indeed he's back to plan, a little bit less far-reaching than Senator Valley's plan, which came from a legislative summer study. But South Dakota legislature is heavily dominated by the governor there. The governor's buy-in is really key to getting anything passed, and Dugard signing on means there's a very good chance that this will get passed here, and the real negotiations are over the scope and scale of this rather than whether anything will happen.
Yeah. Well, David, thanks so much. And a couple of other Midwestern states I want to mention here. Wisconsin was perhaps a bit more on the radar screen a few months ago, but Governor Scott Walker has decided rather than supporting a gas tax increase that he wants to borrow $1.3 billion to fund transportation projects over the next 2 years. And lawmakers reportedly have some concerns about that plan, so we'll have to see how things go there. I also want to mention, and James mentioned earlier, Michigan. Late last year, lawmakers there reached a last-minute deal to have voters consider a 1-cent sales tax increase. And if passed in May, that's expected to produce $1.2 billion annually for roads and $100 million for transit. But it's always a challenge when you're asking folks to raise their taxes and you're doing it in a primary election, so as we've seen it in recent years. So now we're going to head south, and I want to bring in Bruce Seifloff. He covers transportation for the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's been with the newspaper for nearly 40 years. He's also a Duke grad, but as a Kentucky basketball fan, I will not hold him personally responsible for Christian Laettner's shot. But Bruce, I want to show folks this next slide with some of what you think you've been reporting in recent weeks. What can you tell us to sort of fill in blanks here? Go to the next slide. What can you tell us to sort of fill in the blanks here about what we're likely to see in North Carolina this year?
Okay, thanks. Glad to be with you. North Carolina depends on the gas tax, state and federal gas tax, for 70% of its transportation budget. And we don't have county roads here, so the state is responsible for everything except city streets. And we have one of the higher gas taxes in the country. It's set partly by a formula that rises and falls as a percent of fuel prices. So we are looking at the next scheduled readjustment of the tax is going to cut it by 6 to 8 cents a gallon, which would reduce transportation revenues starting in July by as much as $300 million to $400 million a year if nothing happens. There have been some proposals to raise the tax, some proposals to look for other revenues. The governor had promised to come up with some bold new ideas for revenues, but he has backtracked on that for now, and it's just pushing, as you mentioned on the slide, a $1 billion highway bond project, highway bond issue. Just today, as it happens, Senate Republicans, and Republicans control both houses of the legislature here, and the governor is a Republican, Senate Republicans have floated a kind of a complicated gas tax bill that they're calling a tax cut, but what it turns out to be is it would cut the gas tax right now in March and make it a couple pennies lower for the rest of the year, but then it would change the formula under which the gas tax would rise higher than would otherwise be expected for the next several years, making it about a nickel a gallon higher next year and the years after, to raise an additional more than $1 billion in extra gas tax revenues over the next 4 years. And that forecast is predicated on the federal predictions for how fuel prices will rise and fall, and everybody acknowledges that those predictions are not very reliable. They didn't foresee the recent plunge in oil prices. So the Republican just today in the Senate, sitting what I'm talking about, is hit the Senate floor this afternoon, and it'll get its first confrontation there, and we don't know what will happen with it, but it's got the backing of the Republican Senate leaders and some business folks. Otherwise, we've had plenty of studies that have made suggestions for good ways to raise more transportation revenue. Another source of transportation money for North Carolina is what's called the highway use tax. It's a tax on automobile sales. And while our gas tax is much higher than our southern neighbors and in most other states, our tax on car sales is just 3%. It's lower than our neighboring states. But there seems to be no political appetite for tinkering with that tax. The automobile dealers have a pretty good hand on legislative influence here. There have been some other proposals to raise business fees for businesses that DOT provides for little no cost for businesses that are subsidized by other taxpayers, to stop the annual transfer of $250 million in transportation money to go to the state's general fund to pay for things like the highway patrol and other services that are sort of transportation related but not really. But right now we've just got the first blush of this debate on a really hard to understand gas tax proposal that would make gas taxes lower this year but then higher in future years. And no other appetite, no other sign of any other proposals in North Carolina for other new sources of transportation revenue.
Great. Well, thank you, Bruce, as well. We're going to go a little further south now to the state of Georgia and check in with Walter Jones. He is a political reporter and news analyst for the Morris News Service. Walter, you said some talking points about why Georgia finds itself in the situation it is now, about a piece of funding legislation lawmakers will consider this session, and about the politics the measure might come up against. What can you tell us?
Well, Georgia, like a lot of states, has seen transportation funding being dependent on gas tax, which is affected by the improving mileage of cars. So for the last 20 years or so, the chairman of whoever happened to be the chairman of the House and the Senate Transportation Committees have been calling for some kind of gas tax increase. Really didn't gain much momentum until I guess maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. The Department of Transportation estimates that they need about $2.5 billion more per year just to keep the current infrastructure maintained adequately. They need even more money, they say, if you want to address the congestion problems and to prepare for the growth, such as the deepening of the port of Savannah is expected to rapidly increase truck traffic on Georgia's highways. Well, a few years ago, the Chamber of Commerce, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, and affiliates around the state pushed for a plan. They got the charming name T-SPLOST, Transportation Special Purpose Option Sales Tax. And the law put together referendums in 12 regions around the state, and each local county governments had to come up with what they would spend that money on, and then voters got to vote on it in 2013. Well, that was defeated in a glorious manner in 9 of the 12 districts.
but because it passed in 3, that complicates issues just a little bit. So that was supposed to be the solution. It was supposed to be a 1% sales tax increase used for any transportation mode that the local governments wanted to pick. Well, Atlanta was one of the regions that rejected it. And so several different Plan B alternatives bubbled up to the table, but nothing gained any traction. So the legislature created a study committee that had field hearings around the state over this past summer. And I think the idea was to generate some publicity and support for the need to raise additional funds. Didn't really get a whole lot of coverage. They didn't propose a particular plan, and as a result, people said, okay, maybe there's a need, but what are you going to do about it? So the second week of the legislature, the transportation chairman presents House Bill 170. And it's a complicated bill. After hearing some of the other states, it's probably no worse than y'all's, but it's got a lot of moving parts. First, it would phase out the sales tax that local governments can impose on gasoline purchases. It would phase in an increase of the state excise tax. So that would be about a $500 million that would change from going into local coffers into the state coffers. At the same time, it converts the state sales tax to an excise tax. About half the money came from sales tax, half from an excise tax. So it would convert it all to an excise tax per gallon with the idea that that would be a longer-term solution. Doing that apparently captures $60 million from interstate truckers who would ordinarily be able to avoid the sales tax portion of our current tax. It also dedicates what's called here the 4th penny of sales tax strictly to transportation. A political tiff about 20 years ago led to that 4th penny being put in the general revenue fund rather than dedicated toward transportation only. So moving it out of the general fund strictly into transportation leaves a $175 million hole, which legislators have promised that they would cut in order to solve that. There's a provision to beef up an infrastructure bank, which would help the local governments who are losing the sales tax on gasoline sales. It would issue $100 million in bonds one time for transit. Most people interpret that as a payoff to get Democrats to vote for this because their votes are going to be needed in place of Republicans who are opposed to a tax increase. It imposes a $200 annual fee on alternative fuel vehicles with the idea they're not paying gas tax now, so they're getting to use the free roads for free, and that money would go into operating funds for transit, the first time Georgia's ever funded transit operations. And the last feature is that it would index this excise tax to the CAFE standards and to a formula of construction inflation. Now, from a political standpoint, it is interesting that the Speaker of the House says this is not a tax increase. The majority leader says, oh, there's no sleight of hand switching from local governments to state governments with this money. And the transportation chairman says it's not a tax increase. In fact, when people have said it is, he said, now I'm not going to waste my time talking to people who only want to say no. Among the people saying no are the schools and the cities who would be giving up money in their budget that is funded currently by these tax on gasoline sales. Now, the last Speaker of the House in Georgia had an idea to take on the cities and counties with replacing property tax with some sort of sales tax, and he suffered mightily. It was a huge political defeat for him because the local governments rose up together and fought him off. The governor here has said, this is a legislative proposal. I'm going to sort of let it go through the process. He's acknowledged that there is a need, but he hasn't embraced this particular proposal. The Senate is also taking sort of a distant approach. Even though the bill is still in the House committee, it moved from the subcommittee this week to the full Transportation Committee. The Senate is already holding hearings on options. They're not getting specific about alternatives, but they say they want to at least explore something else. So there's not a lot of enthusiasm for it. There are a lot of people that think, well, we've got to do something, and maybe this is the only option. And meanwhile, the anti-smoking groups see this as an opportunity to raise the tax on cigarettes that they've wanted to do for years, and maybe that would go toward filling that hole left by the fourth penny. So we'll see how the ball bounces.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much, Walter, and I understand that you may need to leave us to get to a 3 o'clock meeting, but thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. And for a report on our next southern state, I want to call on Keith Goebel. Keith is the state legislative editor for Landline Magazine, the official publication of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Keith, you've written a bit about some things that may be considered in Texas this year. Folks may remember that Texas voters decided in November to approve a constitutional amendment to divert $1.7 billion annually in severance tax money from the state's rainy day fund to roads. We also know that's nowhere near enough to meet the transportation needs that the TxDOT says are out there. So what are we hearing about what Governor Greg Abbott and state legislators might look to do?
Yeah, nowhere near enough what they're trying to accomplish there, and that's because Texas DOT has said that they have about a $5 billion a year annual shortfall that they're trying to address. And Texas lawmakers, I mean, they've been spending several years trying to come up with a long-term fix for that. Of course, as they spend the time looking into it, trying to come up with a solution, the dollars continue to increase the DOT needs in order to address the maintenance and repairs that they have ongoing. Now, in 2013, lawmakers did approve a funding plan to raise that $1.7 billion a year that you mentioned by diverting 75% of the oil and gas production tax money that has already been coming into the state, but diverting that for roads. Now, up till now, that money has been dedicated to the state's rainy day fund. But after lawmakers signed off on that, it did require a public vote. Voters had the opportunity back in November to decide whether or not to go through with that, and overwhelmingly, they showed support for that. 80% of voters approved that change. So essentially in an effort to continue to build on that public support that they have for roads here, you have Governor Greg Abbott, who has been in office now for about a month. He's called for adding $4 billion more per year for roads, and doing it without raising taxes, without raising fees, and without resorting to pursuing tolls. And he wants to get it done this year. So what may seem like a little bit of an ambitious plan there is understanding in Texas they're only in regular session every other year, every odd-numbered year. So he's only got, the governor only has 2 regular sessions before he has to come up for a potential re-election effort. So that's kind of show a bit of a disadvantage there in Texas as far as getting something done on a massive scale like they're trying to address, again, for that $5 billion annual shortfall, only having to meet for regular session every other year. So what are lawmakers looking at this year, again, with the governor's directive and keeping that well in mind, is there have been dozens of bills that have been offered to try to help address that funding gap. The most popular option to this date has been targeting motor vehicle sales tax revenue. and that's revenue now that goes to the state's general fund. Now, in the past week, this option has been receiving a lot of attention there in Texas because one of the leading state senators has introduced a bill that would tap that motor vehicle sales tax revenue for the state highway fund. Lieutenant Governor has also said that he will help pass that bill. So you do have some very important, influential lawmakers there in Texas that are going to be pursuing, again, that effort for that motor vehicle sales tax revenue, which now in the state that brings in about $4 billion a year. Now, the bill that's targeting that money wouldn't put all of that money into roads. Initially, the idea is about $1.5 billion, maybe upwards of $2 billion over the next several years, working up to that point to benefit roads. Now, much like the effort last fall that voters had to sign off on, using that oil and gas production tax money, getting that from the state's rainy day fund and putting that into roads, voters would, again, like with this issue, get the final decision by November 2016, again, if lawmakers can approve it this year. Another option that is getting a lot of attention is ending a lot of the long-standing budgetary diversions that they do have there in the state. One in particular draws $1.2 billion in fuel tax revenue and vehicle registration fees away from the state highway fund in order to boost other state agencies and projects there in the state. Interestingly, the fuel tax rate in Texas, which hasn't changed since 1991, is set at 20 cents per gallon. A quarter of that revenue is used for other purposes, such as education. So that is being targeted this time around with multiple bills, again, trying to just stop some of the diversions away from transportation-related fees and taxes and putting that into roads. And again, like the other ones I've mentioned, if lawmakers sign off on this, it would then have to go to a public vote. So with the governor's idea calling for an extra $4 billion a year for transportation, you've got, with these two particular efforts, the motor vehicle sales tax revenue, revenue from vehicle registration fees, and the fuel tax, reclaiming that for transportation, you're getting very close to his target amount of revenue.
Great. Well, Keith, thank you so much as well. Some notes on some other southern states to watch this year. In Louisiana, a legislative task force has been meeting to try to come up with ideas for new revenues to help the state deal with a $12 billion backlog of road and bridge work. Rather than offering specific recommendations, the task force decided to forward all of the ideas it has heard throughout its process to the legislature without prioritizing proposals. They'll leave it up to lawmakers to choose among the concepts when they meet for a 2-month regular legislative session that begins in April. Among the ideas they may consider replacing the gas tax with the sales tax on a broader array of fuel sales, dedicating more money in the state construction budget to road work, and redirecting dollars to highways that now go into the state's rainy day fund. In Mississippi, the chairman of the Senate Highways and Transportation Committee, Willie Simmons, wants lawmakers to approve $300 million for timely repairs on state highways and bridges and an additional $100 million for locally maintained roads and bridges. Simmons' legislation may face an uphill battle since many lawmakers prefer to wait for completion of a comprehensive study and proposals from a transportation task force created by the State Chamber of Commerce. In Missouri, the ideas reportedly under consideration include simply hiking fuel taxes by 2 cents a year for 3 consecutive years, indexing the gas tax to the consumer price index, or eliminating the flat cents per gallon tax and assessing a tax based on a percentage of the retail price of fuel. Each 2 cent a gallon gas tax increase would generate about $78 million in additional revenue a year, and any action the legislature would take to raise taxes by $86 million a year or more would, of course, require them to have the voters decide. And as we know, Missouri voters rejected a sales tax increase last August that would have provided billions of dollars for road and bridge repairs there. In South Carolina, Governor Nikki Haley has proposed raising the gas tax by 10 cents over 3 years while reducing the state income tax. A legislative committee that spent nearly 6 months studying the issue has recommended reducing the state's 16.75 cent per gallon gas tax and increasing the sales tax on gas at the wholesale level. The new combined tax would have a ceiling to protect South Carolinians from fluctuating gas prices. And in West Virginia, a 1% sales tax increase is the revenue option being pushed by West Virginia Transportation Secretary Paul Maddox. Maddox says that would provide an additional $220 million a year for state highways. Maddox noted that neighboring Virginia's 1% sales tax hike increased transportation funding there by $1.6 billion a year. But the West Virginia governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on Highways recently concluded that the state needs an additional $750 million a year just to adequately maintain existing roads and an additional $380 million annually to construct proposed new roads. All right, let's go out west and call on Michael Lindblom. He is transportation reporter for the Seattle Times and has been reporting on transportation issues since 1997. Michael, Washington Governor Jay Inslee has proposed a carbon emissions charge on industrial emitters as a way of generating revenues for transportation. It sounds like state lawmakers, however, are looking at a gas tax increase. What do you think is going to happen in Olympia this year? And I know you sent over some talking points and then several charts, graphs to tell us about what's going on in Washington.
Yeah, well, before getting to that material, an hour ago I got a message from House Republicans that says there are renewed rumblings that a transpo revenue package may be imminent. So that sounds pretty exciting, except that we've heard similar things for the last 2 years, and this is the third year that a big gas tax increase has been batted around in Olympia. Last year there was broad agreement between the parties, but the package faltered because a handful of state lawmakers didn't want to include a bridge between Washington and Oregon that had light rail and tolls on it. So the Southwest Washington area opposed the plan, and it failed to pass last year. This year there's broad agreement that there should be a $10 to $12 billion highway, local roads, transit, ferries combined plan. Not much transit though, and 10 to 12 cents a gallon. And if something emerges from the legislature, it's going to be in that range. It's sort of like being on the 1 yard line and figuring out whether you want to throw a pass or just run it into the end zone. Governor Inslee's carbon tax is like the passing option. It's bold. It would be innovative. It would follow the footsteps of British Columbia and California. But there's a lot of opposition to it, to taxing petroleum refineries and other carbon-intensive businesses, and the Republicans are casting it as an indirect tax on the consumer. And it's not seeming to get much traction in Olympia. Okay, so as far as charts and graphs, trends in Washington State, vehicle miles traveled has been declining about 1% a year, and that's changed a lot of the assumptions there. For a while, a few years ago, there was momentum to have tolling make up for differences in the gas tax, but in the current plan, $1 billion in extra gas taxes would be raised in order to avoid tolling the Interstate 90 floating bridge. The State Department of Transportation in the past has wanted to toll that bridge in order to move money to build a new bridge about 4 miles to the north. But it's highly unpopular, and it's considered enough of a political roadblock that everybody is just saying, well, let's just have another penny or so of gas tax instead of trying to toll another bridge. The other big thing that's going on in Washington State is an upcoming urban transit ballot measure, Sound Transit. It's a 3-county area. They want to do between $9 and $15 billion in projects. And that is, it's likely to reach the 2016 ballot in some form or another, big tax increases. And some lawmakers want to force it to be combined with a roads plan because otherwise you don't get the left-right coalition of yes votes on the roads plan unless transit is somehow linked to that. But in 2007, a similar strategy backfired, and Sound Transit went to the 2008 ballot and won by itself with just transit in the urban area. So Washington State, within the urban area around Seattle, we're spending 55% or so of transportation taxes go to transit, around 45% to roads, because we are building a hugely expensive 25-year three-pronged transit network in really tough conditions. So you can see this first chart. It's really complicated, but what you can see is the blue area at the bottom, street and highway revenue. It's been creeping up gradually with various fees here and there, but the transit revenue has risen faster. Okay, and then the next chart here shows vehicle miles traveled. So until very recently, WashDOT presumed a constant, nonstop increase in vehicle miles traveled, but driving in Washington State is so miserable that that trend can't hold. So they've revised it to flat and to go slightly downward. This is seen by environmental groups and urbanist groups as a huge public policy win, but it's not really fast enough to dent global warming by itself, or to give credence to the idea that you should just forget about gas taxes and raise tolls and other things. So driving is going to be with us for a while, but it's just not very popular anymore, especially around Seattle, where our editorial board this morning called worsening congestion in the Puget Sound region a soul-sucking hell. So the last image here, I think, is the debt bomb in Washington State. So 10 years ago, lawmakers passed gasoline taxes of combined over 8 cents a gallon, and voters defended those from an anti-tax initiative. But you can see that when the recession hit, gas taxes didn't increase as fast as lawmakers told themselves that they would. You have 74% of the incoming gas tax going to debt service on our world record Highway 99 tunnel, the 520 floating bridge, other projects. And the governor's own publicity material says that maintenance will decline by half unless there's some new source of money to flush into WashDOT. Some interesting comparisons with the southern states we heard about. North Carolina's governor wants $1.2 billion in debt. Well, our governor is suggesting $3.1 billion in debt. The amount of debt that government is willing to absorb here is remarkable compared to many other states. Georgia, they're talking about moving sales tax toward transportation. In Washington State, one of the big controversies is that sales tax is charged now on transportation projects to pay for criminal justice and education, and the Republicans would like to claw that back and not charge sales tax on road construction, and that would save about 7% on the cost of road building here. So lots more to talk about, but I'll wait for questions on anything else.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Just a reminder, if you have a question for any of our guests, you may enter it into the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Let's talk about a few other western states to watch quickly. In California, Governor Jerry Brown said in his inaugural address last month that fixing the state's aging infrastructure is among his top goals for 2015. The state could reportedly look at a gas tax increase, fees for drivers of electric cars, funds from the state's cap-and-trade program, vehicle registration fees, increased use of toll roads, and increased weight fees. Lawmakers also approved legislation last year to authorize a pilot for a mileage-based user fee program. In Idaho, it has been looking like increases to fuel taxes and registration fees are on the horizon this year, but now some lawmakers are reportedly questioning whether those mechanisms can even provide enough revenue to fix an annual shortfall of $262 million for maintenance and repairs and $281 million for capacity and safety improvements. They say it may be necessary to tap general fund dollars to fill the gap. But Governor Butch Otter, who has been reluctant to get behind a gas tax increase, having been burned before several years ago, has said he doesn't want to see transportation competing with education and other essential services for those general fund dollars. In Montana, Governor Steve Bullock has proposed bonding to cover his nearly $400 million infrastructure bill. Legislators say they're going to break that up into 7 separate bills, including one that would address funding for roads in eastern Montana affected by the oil boom. Bullock says he'll veto any infrastructure plan for all Montanans, paid for by all Montanans, and only benefiting some. In Oregon, Senate Democrats say a transportation funding package is in doubt for this session because Senate Republicans don't want to support bills to continue limiting vehicle carbon emissions. Oregon is also where a 5,000 volunteer mileage-based road usage charge program gets underway this summer. And in Utah, a gas tax increase is reportedly on the agenda for the 2015 session. Lawmakers are split, however, over whether to make the per-gallon charge a sales tax that adjusts annually or just raise the existing gas tax 5 or 10 cents. While the state does not have an existing budget hole right now, transportation officials project an $11.3 billion gap in transportation funding through 2040. Meanwhile, Governor Gary Herbert has said he wants to take approximately $94 million out of the state's transportation fund to put towards education this year. All right, we have one more region of the country to go, and I want to take us up north now and bring in Michael Catalini, who is New Jersey State House reporter for the Associated Press. Michael, we know New Jersey's Transportation Trust Fund faces a crisis this year. We also know that Governor Chris Christie is a likely 2016 presidential candidate, and so may be reluctant to consider things like a gas tax increase. He says everything is on the table, but he also made no mention of the looming crisis in his recent State of the State address. How do you expect things to play out in Trenton this year?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So all eyes in Trenton are on the governor's budget address, which is set for February 24th. In New Jersey, the governor gives the State of the State in January and then typically does a budget address in February. Yeah, as you mentioned, the Governor Christie, who's very seriously thinking about running for president, didn't mention transportation funding issues at all in his previous address. The budget address is, there have been no leaks from the governor's office about what he might say, but most informed people here in Trenton think that he'll sort of be forced or compelled to talk about it. The issue in New Jersey is that the current Transportation Trust Fund, while technically solvent, it brings in enough money, has an issue, which is that over time and over since the life of the fund, since it was created in 1984, it's accumulated debt over the course of Democratic and Republican governors. And so now all of the appropriated, constitutionally dedicated money that comes into the fund is used to pay down debt service. And so lawmakers and the governor in New Jersey have, since going back to, looks like 1989 here, if I'm looking at this, if I'm understanding these figures correctly, have paid for capital investment in infrastructure through bonding. It's been mostly through bonding and so more debt, but since about 2011, monies have come in from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to help defray the cost of capital investment. How to deal with the issue. As you said, the governor has not made clear what he wants to do. He's not laid down any preferences. Some viewed his appointment late last year of Jamie Foxx as Transportation Commissioner as a possible sign that the governor might be willing to consider raising the gas tax in order to pay for capital programs, for infrastructure programs. Jamie Foxx had worked as a Transportation Commissioner under Democratic governors, and so Democrats in Trenton viewed that as a possible positive sign that the governor might be willing to reach a deal. Democrats in Trenton have proposed, there have been any number of proposals. One would raise gross receipts tax on petroleum products about 25 cents, which would cover the fund and make the fund solvent again. That proposal hasn't gotten much traction. Much of Trenton is sort of in this wait and see pattern to as the governor makes up his mind. And the issue there is, as you said, that if the governor is running for president in the Republican primary, it's viewed as politically costly for him to raise taxes in the state. The other big issue with the Transportation Trust Fund in New Jersey has been the rise of this grassroots network called Forward New Jersey, which is sort of a massive interest group that combines very powerful interests in the state of New Jersey, most notably the Chamber of Commerce and labor unions in the state, which are traditionally very influential. And this group has not said how it wants to pay for an increase in the gas. It has not said how it wants to pay for the Transportation Trust Fund, but makes it pretty clear that their purpose is to persuade voters that a gas tax is acceptable, and not only acceptable but needed. And they've taken to the airwaves here in New Jersey with some pretty compelling ads. Most recently one with, it's kind of eerie actually. It features a little girl singing "London Bridge is Falling Down" while the video shows clips of rotting bridges and roads in New Jersey. So in terms of what's going to happen next, waiting on the governor is the big question, and he's made no indication of what will happen next. So I think you know, and Democrats who control the legislature, they control both chambers in the legislature, are eager to. I mean, they've said that they're open to raising taxes. They said that they're casting it as basically taking your medicine. I mean, the state, New Jersey, while it has some of the highest taxes, has the highest property taxes in the country, has, after Alaska, the lowest gas tax in the country. And so lawmakers say they think it's time that the gas tax has been raised, and that compared to neighboring states like New York and Pennsylvania, which have some of the highest gas taxes in the country, New Jersey would still be competitive in terms of, you know, you have drivers who come to New Jersey to get the lower gas, to pay lower, to pay less for their gas to fill up in New Jersey rather than to fill up in Pennsylvania and New York. And members of this coalition argue that New Jersey would still have a competitive advantage in that realm.
Great. Well, thank you, Michael, as well. We have one more report for you this afternoon, and last but certainly not least, Chris Keating is Capitol Bureau Chief for the Hartford Courant in Hartford, Connecticut. Chris, you've been hearing about a transportation plan on the way later this month from Governor Daniel Malloy. What can you tell us about that?
That is correct. That will be unveiled on February 18th, I guess about a week before Chris Christie's. Connecticut is planning something pretty gigantic, actually. By Connecticut standards, Connecticut is about 3.5 million people, a lot smaller than some of your other states you've mentioned, but Connecticut normally tries to play above its weight when they do these things. They're talking about, yes, a 5-year ramp up and then 25 years of construction. We're talking billions and billions of dollars in a transportation plan, all kinds of stuff, widening portions of I-95. And supposedly, they claim that widening I-95 the entire length. And anybody who has driven from Greenwich, Connecticut on the New York State border to Stonington, Connecticut on the Rhode Island border knows that that's very, very far. So obviously you couldn't widen I-95 the entire length all at the same time because you'd have the biggest traffic jam in the Western world. It's unclear how this will all be paid for. They are talking about, it's been kicked around, tolls. The governor has said that he was open for tolls, but he did not reveal a toll plan. Probably in about 10 minutes when I get off this call, the Republicans are announcing their transportation plan, and that's going to have no tolls and no taxes is what I've been told on that. And literally we'll know the answer to that in about 15 minutes. So Connecticut's fairly famous for borrowing money for things. We usually have the highest per capita debt in the nation. Connecticut borrows a lot of money, usually the highest per capita income and the highest per capita debt. So the bond companies figure that Connecticut can borrow a lot of stuff as long as they can pay it off. We had a lot of talk here. I haven't heard from the other callers, although this has been an extremely impressive group. we get lockboxes, a lot of talk about lockboxes and constitutional amendments. That is to just earmark money, transportation money must be spent on transportation. Maybe the other states are ahead of Connecticut, but I didn't hear too much talk about that. One interesting sidelight, the first legislator who was in favor of this, or at least who put in a bill for this lockbox, was a new legislator named Devin Carney, who is the grandson of fame actor Art Carney of the Honeymooners. I don't know if we got any Jackie Gleason and Honeymooners fans out there, but he was pushing for the lockbox and a constitutional amendment to hold that together. So we're talking multi-billions of dollars in Connecticut over decades, and 30 years from now, the chances are very good that Dan Malloy will no longer be the governor, and chances are very good that the legislators who vote on this will not be in office anymore. But one legislature, as maybe in your other states that are listening, one legislature cannot bind or bound a future legislature. So in other words, Connecticut could vote on a 10-year plan, and then when the 10th year rolls around, they just say, well, we're not going to fund it, and we're not going to do this anymore. So yeah, it's big plans in Connecticut for roads, bridges, railroad, the Metro-North commuter railroad. For anybody who's been following that, unfortunately there was another accident in Valhalla, New York. There's been a large number of derailments, unfortunately deaths, train crashes, and all kinds of problems with the Metro-North commuter railroad. Obviously, that goes into Grand Central Station in New York, and there will be money for that. So basically, every single type of transportation will be involved in this plan. So it's fairly big plans for Connecticut, and a week from tomorrow, February 18th, we should know a lot more details, although, you know, some details have been leaking out, but the big portion of the plan will be in about a week.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris, and thanks again to all of our guests this afternoon. We've had a few people that have had to jump off, unfortunately. Just one other eastern state to watch on my list, and that's Delaware. Newly sworn-in Delaware Transportation Secretary Jennifer Cohen said last week one of her biggest priorities will be to look for ways to increase transportation funding, which could include a gas tax hike or an increase in DMV fees. A 10-cent per gallon gas tax increase was proposed last year but never made it to the legislature. Cohen wants to look into public-private partnerships there in Delaware as well. We have just one question that we've received so far, and unfortunately we've had several of our guests had to leave us, and I apologize for us going over the 3 o'clock hour. We told folks this was going to be just an hour, but we have had one question come in, and that says, have any states been seeing a push to mitigate the impact of gas taxes on lower income residents or other taxes for transportation? You know, we hear about some folks say that the gas tax is a regressive tax. So is there anybody on the line with us who has heard anything about that in their states?
Just jump in quickly here. In Minnesota, there haven't been any proposals there, although critics have pointed to the impact on working families as a rhetorical tool to criticize the tax increases here in Minnesota.
Yeah, in Washington State, quite the opposite. Taxes on lower income working folks seem to proliferate because it's hard to raise taxes on upper income folks. But what happens mostly here are subsidies in the transit world. Next month, a special $1.50 fare card is going to be established for folks who make less than twice the poverty level, and that's supposed to offset new transit taxes.
Okay, great. Well, I think that is about all the time we have. I apologize again for taking it so far past 3 o'clock, but that is all the time we have for today's webinar, and I want to thank all of our guests for joining us this afternoon. Here is a slide with how you can follow us all on Twitter, and thanks also to everyone who logged in to join us today. Be sure to check the CSG website for information about future eCademy webinars. I'm Sean Sloan at the CSG headquarters in Lexington. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.